at this point in the UFC, if you're not coming in through the Contender Series, road to the UFC, or taking fights on short notice, there really isn't any way to come in.
Yeah.
You can't just say that out loud, Daniel. I mean, we all know it, but you're not supposed to say it. Anyways, welcome back to another episode of the Mixing Martial Arts podcast. We just had a really great weekend of fights. The UFC card was really fun. Bellator and PFL put on shows. A lot of really good prospects on the Bellator card especially. Rajadamnern World Series, the Muay Thai promotion, has just started their 147-pound tournament this year, and there's a couple top guys in that. I'll go over the UFC card and the Muay Thai on this podcast, and that'll probably take up all the time we have, and I will talk about the prospects on Bellator's card as a premium episode for my Substack subscribers at mixingmartialarts.com. The main event of the UFC card, of course, was supposed to be Khamzat Chimaev against Robert Whittaker originally, but Chimaev pulled out due to his continuing health issues. That seems to be a big problem for Chimaev, unfortunately. I heard a guy from his camp talking, I think it might have been Gustafsson, about how he's like the hardest worker in the camp, and whenever he starts training hard, his body just starts breaking down. He gets sick all the time. It seems like it's been a constant issue with him ever since he got COVID a couple years back, unfortunately. So we ended up getting Whittaker versus Chimaev at home on short notice, Ikram Aliskerov. I haven't watched too many of Aliskerov's fights so far, but I did read the article that Jack Slack put out on him, and the gist of it is that he likes his long-range jabs, a little step-up head kick with his lead leg, and he doesn't like being at close range very much unless he's grappling. It didn't take Whittaker too long here to remind everyone exactly who he is. About 2 minutes into the first round, he blitzed in and landed a big right hand that wobbled Aliskerov, then followed him back to the cage, tapped him up high with his lead hand just to draw the guard up, and split it with a big uppercut that finished Aliskerov right off. It was the sort of classic Whittaker stuff that we haven't seen in quite a while. My good friend Miguel Class on Twitter posted a video that showed off how Whittaker got the read on Aliskerov's reaction to his feints. Whenever Whittaker bounced in like he was going to blitz or pump out a jab, Aliskerov would rock his weight to the rear foot and lift up his lead leg like he was looking to counter it with a high kick. Whittaker would also bounce back a couple times to draw Aliskerov forward and then try to time his forward step by bouncing in with a jab. And when that happened, Aliskerov would give ground and just retreat out of range. So he was trying to time Whittaker coming in with his lead leg, and when he was kind of caught off guard, he would just back up and then reset and try the exchange again. Whittaker only needed to see him pick the leg up a couple times before he was ready to immediately exploit it. He blitzed in, took a sharp angle inside Aliskerov's stance, and threw the right hand knowing that he'd be rocking his weight back and lifting his lead leg, and Whittaker just feinted around a couple times, then went in really fast before Aliskerov could react with his counter. In terms of what went wrong for Aliskerov, a big part of it is just experience on Whittaker's part, and there's levels to this shit aspect, where Whittaker was just ready to go right away. He saw that reaction from Aliskerov a couple times, and then immediately put it to use exploiting it, where Aliskerov didn't really have a chance to establish anything, or he hadn't made any useful reads that he could put into practice yet. And he's just not fought the kind of fighter that can see you do something like that 2 or 3 times and then immediately knock you out for trying it again. The lead leg body kick under the right hand is a classic counter in same stance matchups. You see it a lot in Muay Thai, but you really need a solid read on the distance to make it work well. You want the right hand to fall short or to be able to give just enough ground that the right hand isn't reaching you, and just let the body kick slide in underneath their arm as their elbow leaves their ribs. Aliskerov looked pretty uncertain about it. Like he was picking his leg up at a couple different ranges. He would pick it up at different angles. Like sometimes he would think about the head kick, and sometimes it looked like he wanted to throw like a messy teep or a knee. On the exchange that led to the finish, Aliskerov was just way too close to make the head kick or body kick counter work. It looked like he might have been going for a knee because he kind of picked the leg up straight, and the knee actually landed as Whittaker blitzed in, but trying to time that long right hand by kneeing with your front leg is a much riskier counter than the kick, since it's at a much closer range, and when you bring the knee up, it takes your shoulder away from your chin on the lead side, where that right hand can just fit right in. And Whittaker, the combination of Whittaker taking the deep angle inside Aliskerov's stance and Aliskerov going for the knee, the right hand just snuck inside his shoulder and knocked him silly. And Aliskerov is someone that doesn't like move his head or guard a lot. He usually relies on that lead shoulder covering his chin to protect against the right hand. If you're looking for a counter knee in that kind of situation, a better option is to step in close distance and meet them in the middle with a rear knee. If you can time their rear hand, you can extend your lead arm and keep your shoulder protecting the chin, so the right hand bounces off it and your knee spears them. Another issue was that Aliskerov was giving Whittaker all that space and time to feint out and gather information on his reactions. If someone's having a lot of success drawing out your reactions like that, it's often good practice to work in your own feints off those. So if you're trying to counter with the lead leg and you keep ending up lifting your lead leg at feints, you can step in off that with your jab and like start pairing the lead leg and the jab, maybe step into a jab and leg kick, and then he's going to have to make a response to that, and you've started gathering some information on him rather than largely surrendering the initiative. In general, I think there's a little bit of a misconception about fighters like Robert Whittaker and Kyoji Horiguchi who rely a lot on in and out blitzes. A lot of people seem to think that countering them as they come in is the best way to beat them, but if you're waiting on a guy like that, it's very, very hard to time him on the way in. Fighters like Whittaker and Horiguchi, if you give them space to play with their entries and feint around, they aren't going to just tip off their entries to you. They're great at using feints and establishing and then quickly breaking a rhythm with their footwork to mess with your timing. They usually have a couple pairs of strikes with similar preliminary motions that they can mix up to play with your reactions. Whittaker has his jab to the body and head and a left hook that all come out of a similar looking level change. And if you're waiting on him, waiting to time him on entry, then you're left guessing at which one of those is coming. And if you pick wrong, he's going to smack you for it. They also often blitz in on diagonals rather than a straight line. So if you're trying to counter them with a straight shot, their head often isn't on line. Like you saw Whittaker here, when he came in for the kill shot with the right hand, the deep angle he took to the side got his head off the center line. And if Aliskerov had just like flicked out a jab as he came in to intercept him, Whittaker would have just gone outside it. Using elbows as an intercepting counter can avoid some of those pitfalls. Since they attack on a horizontal plane rather than just going straight out, even if their head gets like a little inside or outside your punch, it doesn't matter as much. And the elbow is also a physical barrier that they can't close distance through. Like if you try to counter the entry with a lead hook and you don't time it perfectly, a very quick blitzing fighter like Whittaker will often be inside the path of your hook before you get it off. But with an elbow, they're more likely to just run into it, like you saw in the Darren Till fight when he dropped Whittaker with that big counter elbow. In general, I think the kind of strategies that best counter those blitzing fighters like Whittaker or Horiguchi aren't necessarily simultaneous counters as they're coming in, but rather guys who can either play a pressure counterpunching game where they push them back and cut them off early in their entry, or opponents who can give ground and draw their blitzes out. If you can pressure them, you can force them into close quarters and take away their time and space that they use to play with and set up their entries, forces them into more predictable entries, and makes it a lot easier to counter. We talked about Rob's body jab, jab to the head, and left hook mix-up. If you're letting him breathe in open space and you're giving him time to condition you to a certain rhythm with his footwork and then suddenly break it, you're left guessing at what strike is coming. He's gonna feint you out, change levels, and then you'll have to guess where the punch is going. And after doing that a couple times, suddenly he'll change up and gadoosh you with the right hand. But if you can advance continually and eat up space, you take away the time he has to play with the rhythm on his footwork and execute those little level change preliminary motions. And then the entries get a lot easier to time and counter. It doesn't matter so much whether he's throwing the jab to the body, the jab to the head, or the left hook, if you can hit him with a counter before his arm is extended. We saw that in the Dricus du Plessis fight, where he advanced, put a little bit of pressure on Rob, took away his time and space to set up and play with rhythm and timing, and he was able to run him into a hard southpaw jab before Rob had the time to feint around and play with rhythm on his entry. And du Plessis didn't have to wait and guess at the punch that was coming for his counter because he was close enough to time the entry itself. Just had to stick his hand out and let Whittaker run himself onto it. Israel Adesanya took the opposite route in their first fight. He sat back at range, let Whittaker come to him, and just backed up and circled off when Whittaker blitzed, instead of planting his feet and trying to counter. Whittaker was left falling short on his rushes and missing, and all the while Adesanya was picking him off with kicks from range. Whittaker eventually got frustrated after missing a lot, started trying to extend the exchanges off his blitz, squaring his stance up and getting sloppy, and Adesanya eventually sparked him out on the counter off one of those exchanges when Rob blitzed in, couldn't find anything, and then tried to bear down in the pocket and throw hands with him. Of course, neither of these strategies are easy tasks. If you want to pressure Rob and force him into predictable entries that you can counter, you have to be able to deal with his own dangerous counters. And if you want to keep giving ground and making him fall short, then you need weapons that can reliably score on him from the outside without exposing you, like Adesanya's kicks, which not a whole lot of fighters have. You can see a similar dynamic at play in the fights of Muay Thai fighter Seoek or Achuria. He's one of my favorite contemporary Thais. Was one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in Muay Thai a few years ago, but he was recently banned from the sport for fight fixing, sadly. But before he got booted from the sport for throwing a fight, he had a really interesting blitzing style. He would use a split step to initiate his rear body kick and head kick, and when opponents started getting the timing on that, he would do his split step and then shift forward into southpaw with elbows. And when opponents tried to time him on the way in with counters, they would get confused about whether a big kick or a big elbow was coming and end up eating the strike. He struggled most with opponents who could stay defensively responsible at a long range and then just vacate the space on his blitzes and pick at him from the outside. Sayowek's fight with Ranachai Toramintra was a great example of that dynamic, where Ranachai just made his blitzes fall short, made him kick into checks, and then eventually, when he couldn't find his usual success with his blitzes, he had to come forward in a more orthodox manner and Ranachai could pick him off with counter kicks. Whittaker now finds himself in a weird place where he's lost to both the champion and the number one contender, but he's beaten most of the other top guys at middleweight. I think a fight between him and Sean Strickland makes a lot of sense next. I think Strickland would be a really awkward matchup for him. Just the way Whittaker's offense is set up, he tends to work in bursts of like 1 to 3 punches and doesn't really do a whole lot of organic punch selection in the pocket. And Strickland's kind of odd, extended hands, framey boxing defense works really good on covering against like the first layer or two of entries. And if you can pressure from there and extend exchanges, then his positioning starts breaking down. But Whittaker doesn't really do that a whole lot, so I could see him kind of moving in and out with a lot of pot shots or 2-punch combinations and failing to really get a lot of clean work done. But I also think Whittaker's a lot craftier offensively, especially with his boxing, than most of the fighters Strickland has fought so far. So it'd be interesting to see if he can figure out a way around Strickland's awkward defense. There were a lot of other fun fights in this card. What else was there? I didn't watch the heavyweights because I value my time. Kelvin Gastelum versus Daniel Rodriguez was a lot of fun. This was, I think, Kelvin's second fight back at welterweight, after he originally had to move up because he kept missing weight at welterweight. And they had to bump this fight up to middleweight too, because apparently Kelvin called them and let them know before weigh-ins that the whole making weight thing was just not going to happen. Rodriguez said he was below 185 when they told him the fight was going to be moved up, so he had to go back and put weight on for the fight. Kelvin disagreed with this and tweeted out that his camp asked for 175, but D-Rod's camp countered with 185. I straight up do not believe this. You do not actually have to hand it to Kelvin Gastelum in an argument about him missing weight. So Kelvin missed weight by 15 pounds and his cardio held up really well. Funny how that works, huh? This was quite a fun boxing match. Both guys looked pretty good. D-Rod was pumping his jab out a lot early, jabbing and circling. He was jabbing the chest, which I really liked. It kind of gave Kelvin pause when he was coming forward, made him hesitate a little bit, and set up further jabs upstairs. He had a bit of difficulty building off his jab or landing it clean early in the fight. Kelvin would pull his weight back over his rear foot or slip outside on his rear hip when D-Rod threw the jab, and he was making it miss a lot. I thought there was an opportunity for D-Rod to capitalize on that with leg kicks. When he's pulling his weight over his rear foot or slipping over his rear hip, he's briefly out of position to check a leg kick for a moment, especially in a bladed stance like Kelvin's. If you kick the leg at that point, their weight isn't really set right to lift their leg up to check and turn it out, or to step in and jam the kick, and you have a good chance of just punting them right out of their stance. D-Rod threw a couple leg kicks early, but he stopped throwing them pretty quickly, and he didn't really pair it with his jab. He was looking to use his lead hook to counter Kelvin's rear hand all fight, but he struggled to get the timing down on it because Kelvin's still super fast. I mean, he's very fast. Kelvin was landing those quick rear hand leads pretty consistently, and he started weaving in off them to close distance into punching combinations. He would throw out the rear hand and then dip his head down and weave into a lead hook, and use that to back D-Rod up to the cage and cut him off. In the second round, D-Rod started pivoting off his jab. When Kelvin would slip over his rear hip, he would kind of get stuck on that hip, and he wasn't ready to immediately move his feet and keep up with exchanges. So D-Rod would throw out a jab to get him slipping over the hip, and then pivot to an inside angle. He was able to land some nice, hard rear hands, and use the jab to pivot off and get himself away from the cage. Kelvin started smartly attacking the pivot with leg kicks. In the second round, he landed a really nice one, where he punted him with a calf kick and knocked him out of his stance, and then led him right into a big lead hook while he was recovering his balance. The leg kick, of course, one of the best tools to attack somebody who's always leading with their jab, especially when they're using it to pivot and circle towards your outside leg kick. Gastelum also had a pretty easy time wrestling when he wanted to. There was one time in the second round, Rodriguez planted his feet and threw a really hard rear hand, and it was one of the first times he'd done that in the whole fight. And Kelvin read it and was able to get it on a well-timed reactive takedown. That was some really nice timing from him, especially since it wasn't a look that he'd seen too often before in the fight. So Gastelum ended up with a win in a fun fight, but Rodriguez ended up taking home 30% of his purse. I think they should implement some kind of sliding scale for Gastelum's fights. This time it's 30, next time he misses weight it's 40. See if we can eventually get him fighting for free. Consistently missing weight like that, of course, is only cool when Mackenzie Dern does it. When Gastelum does it, it's very lame and unprofessional. That's about all that stood out to me on the main card, but there were several really good prelims. I watched a bit of Sharapudin Magomedov's fight, but I kind of lost interest halfway through. He has some pretty cool kicks and some neat setups for them, but I just don't really see a whole lot in his game that really draws me in. Between his footwork and his lack of boxing, I think he'll struggle a lot when he starts fighting better competition. Jared Gordon and Nasrat Haqparast had a really fun little brawl, sort of a back and forth fight with a lot of momentum swings, ended up being a close decision. Haqparast was kind of boxing him up a bit early, and in the second round, Gordon came on strong with his pressure, did some really nice work on the inside. Gordon's not much of an athlete, and he's not a great striker, but when he's able to... Gordon's not much of an athlete, and he's not a great striker, but when he's able to get inside, he does some really nice work in transitions. He has a real nice dirty boxing game, and he pairs his attacks really well with his positional improvements. He'll pop you with a couple uppercuts and then like a right hook around your collar tie just to move your hand around and open up your elbow so he can swim his arm inside, get a better control position, and then use that to hit you more. There was a lot of really nice dirty boxing work from both guys in his fight with that Danish wrestler, Marco Madsen, I think it was. Gordon was really kind of breaking Haqparast down in the second round and looked like he was almost en route to a finish, but Nasrat got a bit of a second wind in the third round, started getting his straight punches going, and did a better job preventing Gordon from getting inside. Gordon's kind of one of those guys who's so easy to beat in exchanges that opponents kind of get lured into like planting their feet and swinging at him. He's not super durable, so when he fights like an upper level guy in the division, they just spark him out. But if you can't just knock him out, he's tough as hell and he's not going to stop coming. And you're beating him in exchanges up until the point where you get tired and you're not anymore. And he starts finding his spots to get inside and work in transitions. It's a lot easier for most guys to beat him by limiting exchanges to the first couple layers, pivoting away, countering his entries, to strand him at range where he's not very skilled. But the lure of smacking him right in the gob is so hypnotizing that guys have trouble pulling themselves away from that kind of fight. And Haqparast ended up kind of playing into Gordon's kind of fight, but he did enough to get the win in the end. I thought the decision could have gone Gordon's way, but it was a pretty close fight either way, I think. Rinat Fakhretdinov and Nicolas Dalby also had a fun brawl with a lot of interesting striking on the inside. Fakhretdinov is a really weird fighter. He has like crafty old veteran striking, but without the fundamental base of ever having been a good striker in the first place. His striking game is like a series of different one weird tricks that he cycles through without really a whole lot in the way of fundamentals. Some of his tricks are pretty crafty though, like he likes wading in behind a long rear straight and then weaving into his left hook. He'll also completely square his stance up and wing out the silliest looking hook combo you've ever seen, and use that to distract guys to get in on their hips with takedowns. I swear to God, I saw him fight and thought that he reminds me of a Kudo fighter, and then I looked him up on Wikipedia and it turns out he trained Kudo in his youth. Kudo is kind of like a hybrid karate MMA rule set where they fight with gis under like some kind of MMA rule set, and they wear these really silly looking bubble helmets. I don't know too much about the sport or how the rules work, but whenever you watch highlights of it on YouTube, there's like these guys in the gis and the silly bubble helmets just doing like a bunch of wild swings, but there's some craft in them too in like a very unpolished way. Hisaki Kato, I think, was a Kudo champion of some sort, and he had a short MMA and kickboxing career before discovering his true love of knocking out Joe Schilling. Fakhretdinov also has respectable wrestling and top control in that kind of Dagestani cage riding meta. He's not elite with it though. He's not going to be keeping down and damaging like strong athletes with solid defensive wrestling. He spent a bit of time trying to ride Dalby's legs along the cage in kind of a knee mount, where the bottom player is sitting up along the cage with their legs extended and the top player is sitting on them and tying the legs up. But Fakhretdinov wasn't able to get a good bite on the legs, and he wound up sitting very low near the ankles. And you can't really do much from there because you have to keep your posture very low and compensate with your hands to hold on to them, using your hands to hug their hips or hold on to a body lock, or else they can just bend their knees in and start standing up. So he couldn't use his hands to hit or control Dalby's posture and just kind of had to hang out there for a while. If you watch Khabib Nurmagomedov in that position, he often enters the position by, instead of going right to sitting on their legs, he'll pick up the legs with his hands and then knee slide underneath the leg. He elevates the legs and just like slides his knee right through underneath it. That lets him get really deep in on the leg, so he's sitting on the thigh above the knee, and then he locks up his figure four with his legs. So instead of sitting on the ankles where they can start bending their legs and standing back up, he's sitting on their mid-thigh closer to their hips. So he doesn't have to desperately hold on to them with his hands to prevent them from escaping. He can use his legs to just control their body, and then his hands are free to smash their face in or to just like take their head and physically force it down and break their posture. And Fakhretdinov was trying to go for the inside wrist control from that position, but he wasn't controlling Dalby's posture, so it was hard for him to get any good grip on it. With Khabib, he'll just take his hands, smush your head to the floor, so you're lying on the ground against the cage with your back kind of folded up so you can't generate any power. He's sitting on your thighs with his legs locked around them, and he can just easily grab the inside wrist control and start punching you with the other hand. Dalby looked pretty good here. He seems to have put on quite a bit of muscle in his return to the UFC, and it's made him a lot more effective in the clinch. He's able to move guys around a lot better now. He still loves those little flicking lead leg head kicks at range. He's not really super dexterous with it though, like somebody like Wonderboy. He can't just flick the leg up at a moment's notice and catch you unaware with a head kick. His hip flexibility and timing just isn't really there for that. But they're pretty dangerous and hard to see coming when he sneaks them behind punching combinations. He domed Fakhretdinov with a big one late in the third round, I think, where he chucked out a punch combination and then quickly flicked up the lead leg into the head. I was impressed with Dalby's clinch striking here too. He used his head really well on the inside, like posting it in Fakhretdinov's jaw on the clinch to stand him up and help control the position. He used his strikes to create openings to improve position really well. There were a couple times he would land a hard elbow and then flow right in from the elbow into an underhook or collar tie and keep hitting Fakhretdinov. Another thing I quite liked from Dalby in the clinch, when he had Fakhretdinov pressed against the cage with an underhook or a body lock, and Fakhretdinov started pummeling his hand inside, instead of trying to hold on to the position really tight and then just ending up losing it when Fakhretdinov got inside, he would just let it go and then repummel before Fakhretdinov could establish his underhook. So instead of just losing the position and letting Fakhretdinov get an underhook and turn him onto the cage, there'd be a moment where they're both fighting for inside control, but neither has established the position yet, and Dalby would use that to strike and then use Fakhretdinov's reaction to his strike to go back to his positional control. Somehow Fakhretdinov ended up with the win on the judges' cards. I'm not really sure how. I thought Dalby pretty clearly won the second and third round. The last fight that stood out to me on the UFC card is Felipe Lima's performance against Muhammad Naimov. I've never heard of this guy, but he looked quite impressive. When I was watching the fight, I was rooting for Lima because I kind of vaguely recalled not liking Naimov, but I didn't know why. And then after this fight, I was reminded by Twitter posts of how Naimov basically cheated his way to a win against Nathaniel Wood, kicking him in the balls a few times, grabbing the fence, grabbing his glove. Just an incredibly versatile cheating performance. An interesting thing about Lima here is that Naimov is quite a good wrestler and Lima was pretty comfortable kicking against him. That can be pretty risky because against a guy like Naimov, if you lose balance on one kick or the guy times a takedown, that can be the whole round thrown away. But he was quite good about timing his kicks. It was an open stance matchup with Naimov and southpaw, and Lima would backstep into southpaw himself to time really hard outside leg kicks. Naimov was switching stances too, and there were a couple times where Lima would mirror his stance switch and get off a quick open side kick to the body, which was really nice and a good way to disguise it so the guy can't time a takedown at the same time. Lima also showed some nice swarming combination work on the front foot up points, some neat body and head combos, a few nice looks with his clinch striking as well. Naimov quickly started trying to step in and time the kicks with takedowns, but aside from one point in the first round where Lima got caught in a stance switch and fell over, his takedown defense held up well. He would sort of duck in and close distance off his kicks, dropping his level and physically bumping into Naimov, and that was a great way to halt his momentum on the takedown attempt and give Lima a moment to down block and get his hands down for an underhook. Following up your kicks with some kind of physical disruption tactic like that is a great way to maintain distance and avoid grappling attempts. Demetrius Johnson was a great example of that. He had those really quick, skipping inside leg kicks, and when guys started trying to step in and close distance or shoot takedowns off them, he would just physically shove them away or use a collar tie to prevent them from closing distance. He did that a lot in the Wilson Hayes fight, and it allowed him to pretty much land kicks for free. And then in the third round, Naimov ended up giving his back, missing an inside trip, and Lima quickly capitalized by finishing him with a rear naked choke. I was quite impressed with Lima's performance here, and I'll be keeping an eye out for him in the future. He's only 26 years old right now, but he has been fighting in MMA for quite a while, almost 10 years, so he's probably pretty close to fully developed as a fighter at this point. Not too sure how far he can go in a really tough featherweight division, but at the very least he'll put on some fun fights, I expect. That covers the UFC card. The biggest thing happening in Muay Thai this weekend was the Rajadamnern World Series 147-pound tournament. RWS is an entertainment Muay Thai promotion that kind of aims to be more of a fusion between traditional Muay Thai and entertainment Muay Thai than something like One Championship. They have the 3-round fights and round-by-round open scoring, but they allow more clinch than one does, and they have the big gloves. If you're interested in learning more about the split between traditional Muay Thai and entertainment Muay Thai, as well as the details of those promotions and my thoughts on them, I recorded a premium podcast a couple weeks ago on listener questions, and one of the answers goes into a lot more detail on the differences between all those different promotions. But RWS holds tournaments in a couple different weight classes each year, and the way they usually do it is they'll get a group of like 2 to 4 top ties at that weight, and then sign several other non-ties who are a lot lower level and kind of just like fodder for their stars to beat up. And there are good non-ties in Muay Thai that might be able to be more competitive with them, but RWS seems like they target non-ties with like really action-oriented skill sets that just aren't really very good at scoring under a Muay Thai format. The big exception to that is Danny Rodriguez at 154 pounds. He's a Swiss fighter, I think, and he's the top guy in that division. But 154 is quite weak and very low on competitive ties anyway. This year they're holding tournaments at 126 pounds, 140 pounds, 147, and 154. Their 126 tournament is particularly interesting. They have a group of 4 very elite ties: Yathin FA Group, Chaila Porlakmun, Viu Petskotson, and Ranachai Torramitra. All 4 are some of the best fighters in Muay Thai. Yathin, Chaila, and Viu I have all in my top 10 pound for pound, so that'll be a really interesting group. The way the tournaments work is I think they have some kind of like round robin setup where everybody fights each other, or everybody fights most of the other fighters at that weight, and then after the fights have taken place, they like take the points, and the fighters with the most points get into like a playoff round. Honestly, I've never paid too much attention to how exactly the format works, because I just assume any of the fighters I care about will make it into the playoff round anyway, and they pretty much always do. So this week was the first round of their 147 pound tournament, which includes Yodwicha, Chujaroen, Tapaokaew, Hercules, and a couple non-ties, Erdem Dinser, Max McVicker, and Sajjad Satari. The A sides here are obviously Chujaroen, Tapaokaew, and Yodwicha. I'd be really shocked if anybody else won. I don't know if there's any odds out, but I would put Chujaroen and Tapaokaew as the clear favorites. Yodwicha was the runner-up to last year's 154-pound tournament, eventually losing to Tananchai Sitsong Pinong in the finals. This year, he's dropping down to their 147-pound division, as his friend and training partner, Ridovada Sidakul, is fighting at 154 pounds. Ridovada won the 147-pound tournament last year, but he's said that he can no longer make the weight and has to move up. Him and Yodwicha fought each other in the stadiums like a decade ago. They had 2 fights, I think, and Ridovada won both. It was a really big upset at the time, and since then they've apparently trained together quite a bit, and Yodwicha has said he doesn't want to fight Ridovada. So keeping in mind that Tapaokaew and Chujaroen are the 2 clear favorites to win the tournament, at least in my view, RWS did what any good tournament organizers do and threw them together in the first round. They fought once before in February of this year, and Chujaroen won a pretty dominant decision. Tapaokaew is a super aggressive clinch mauler. He spends most of his fight storming forward to get to the clinch and working with relentless knees. Chujaroen is also very strong in the clinch, but he's a much savvier kicker on the outside, and in their first fight, he would intercept Tapaokaew coming in with hard kicks. He kicks off both legs really well. He has kind of a balanced stance that lets him kick ambidextrously. He mixes up both legs really well, makes it hard for guys to know where to aim their check. So he put Tapaokaew through a meat grinder of like kicks and knees as he's coming in, and then in the clinch, Chujaroen was able to tie him up and neutralize him, so Tapaokaew couldn't get off his main offense. The rematch was a lot more competitive, and it turned out to be a really great fight. If you watch any of the fights I've talked about based on this podcast, make it Chujaroen versus Tapaokaew. It's worth your time. After getting ground up with kicks on the outside in their first fight, Tapaokaew started out super aggressive here. He stormed forward with punching combinations, trying to push past Chujaroen's kicks on the outside, pushed him back with the teep, and just marched him down and went wild in the pocket. His best strike early in the fight, he would push Chujaroen back to the ropes and land a really nice short right hook on the ear right behind Chujaroen's guard. In the second round, Chujaroen started standing his ground more, throwing out heavy kicks as Tapaokaew stepped in, so he would have to pick up his legs to check the kicks, or they would just physically push him back. Chujaroen also landed a couple head kicks that punished Tapaokaew for getting really aggressive. There was a really nice one in the opening of the second round. Chujaroen backed him off with a kick combination, and Tapaokaew tried to storm past it and threw a teep at him. Chujaroen batted the teep to the side and threw up a really quick head kick in tight without a lot of space. It was really slick. Chujaroen also started stepping into the clinch earlier rather than backing himself to the ropes and letting Tapaokaew open up with punches. And when he got in the clinch, he was able to largely neutralize Tapaokaew, either creating basically neutral exchanges or beating him in the clinch at times. While Tapaokaew is very aggressive in the clinch and is largely pretty good there, he's really comfortable entering the clinch with like neutral hand position. He'll storm forward and reach for the clinch and kind of settle into a lock with one arm inside and one arm outside. If you watch his recent fight with Kapitan, he completely mauled Kapitan in the clinch, but he was always entering with that kind of neutral hand position, and then he would do something to tilt the exchange in his favor. He'd dip his head down into the chin and use it to stand Kapitan up and like turn him off balance, or he would pivot outside of his stance and get to like a side lock. But against a guy like Chujaroen, who's good in the clinch, has height on Tapaokaew, and is a very good athlete and strong, it's really hard to turn those neutral positions into dominant positions. And with Tapaokaew not really fighting for dominant positions with both hands inside on the entry to the clinch, he had a lot of trouble translating that to meaningful offense once he got there. The first 2 rounds were fought at a super grueling pace, and they were 1 round apiece going into the final round. The third round wasn't quite as intense, but they were still really going for it. Chujaroen started giving more ground, and Tapaokaew started landing some good kicks off of his marching. As Chujaroen backed up and tried to pivot off, he would follow his exits with the body kicks. I scored the fight for Chujaroen. I had him winning the second and third rounds. Tapaokaew ended up winning a split decision, and I thought it was pretty close and could have gone either way. If they end up meeting in the tournament finals for a rematch, it could be anyone's fight, but I have trouble seeing Tapaokaew being able to keep up that kind of pace for 5 rounds. Jadwiga Porbunsit's first fight of the tournament was against Max McGiver, but before this, he fought twice last Saturday, exactly a week before the start of the tournament. He beat 2 guys on the same day in a Chinese kickboxing promotion, and that fight was at 154, so he had a week after fighting 2 guys in the same day to cut down to 147 for this fight. McGiver landed a couple decent body kicks in the first couple minutes of the fight, but Jadwiga quickly got his marching footwork going, and that shut down most of McGiver's offense. The marching footwork took away the open side by putting a shin or knee in front of it while he was marching forward through stances, and McGiver had trouble landing the kick after that. Jadwiga would throw his own body kicks coming out of his marching footwork, and McGiver had a lot of trouble reading that. He would back off from the Jadwiga's marching advance and then suddenly eat a kick that he couldn't read. McGiver was trying to catch Jadwiga's body kicks early, and Jadwiga started feeding him right hands off the kick. He would throw the kick and then immediately throw the right hand after it without touching his leg down, and McGiver would eat the punch with his arms occupied holding the leg. Punching off your body kicks is always a good way to foil somebody that's trying to catch them, as long as you have the balance to stay on your feet and they can't just sweep you right after they've caught it. A great example of this is Sangmini's second fight against Tawanchai. In their first fight, Tawanchai was outkicking him on the outside, and he was countering Sangmini's round kicks by catching and sweeping. And in their rematch, Sangmini started putting punches behind his kicks, and when Tawanchai would go to drop his hands to catch the kick, he'd end up eating Sangmini's left hand a lot. There was one really cool moment in the first round where Jadwiga caught one of McGiver's kicks and drove him back into the ropes, and then landed a big jumping knee to the body. Later on in the fight, McGiver started trying to pivot off and turn Jadwiga as he was marching forward. That can be a good way to diffuse a rapid linear rush by making the guy stop and turn on the spot, and then you can get your attacks off while he's occupied with that. But McGiver wasn't able to capitalize much on that with any clean offense, and Jadwiga didn't have much trouble just pivoting with him and following him with kicks. After winning the first 2 rounds under the open scoring, Jadwiga just fought off the back foot for the last round and tried to intercept him with jabs and knees. Although just a couple seconds before the end of the fight, McGiver landed a nice elbow that cut Jadwiga open. Jadwiga ended up winning comfortably as expected, but it wasn't the most inspired performance from him. Although McGiver, to his credit, looked quite a bit better than the usual Farang fodder that they feed these guys. Like Jadwiga's last fight in RWS was against some Chinese guy that I'm not familiar with, and he just thoroughly busted the guy up with elbows to a doctor stoppage after the first round. So at least McGiver had something for him. Hercules Warjackroot and Sajjad Satari fought in the first round of the tournament as well. Hercules is honestly one of my least favorite fighters to watch in Muay Thai. He hasn't been as bad since coming to RWS, but in his stadium days, his skill sets are being like really tall and long and having a suffocating but really inactive clinch game. So every fight was just him finding his way inside, being difficult to score on because of his length and height, and just kind of smothering his opponent on the inside, but he usually wouldn't do too much clean work in the clinch. Since growing into the upper weight classes at 147 pounds and moving to RWS's more action-oriented rule set though, he's at least been a bit more interesting to watch. In this fight, they traded kicks on the outside early, with Hercules picking at him with a long lead leg kick, and he started feigning switch steps with the lead leg to show the lead leg kick, and then landing his heavier rear kick. Satari was largely outgunned in the kicking battle, but he managed to threaten with some cut kicks, almost sweeping Hercules at some points, and he landed a couple decent shots off some shifting setups, switching to southpaw and then throwing the round kick or his rear hand. In the second round, Satari ran Hercules onto a nice intercepting elbow and opened up a cut on him. After eating that elbow, whenever they came together on the inside, Hercules was really conscious to either slip outside the path of his lead hand or control it and parry it across his body, and he started hitting clinch entries off the elbows where Satari would go to elbow and he would slip outside of it and get him in that kind of head and arm lock, like when you're going for an arm triangle in MMA. It's a really dominant position. It's really easy to throw from, and you can land knees uninterrupted. Or he would just parry the arm across the body and then step into the clinch at an angle around the side of Satari, where Satari couldn't face him and do anything. Satari couldn't get too much going after that, and Hercules ended up winning a comfortable decision. The final fight was Erdem Dincer against Saimpon Sorsomai. This was a pretty fun fight. They were both throwing down. Dincer came forward with heavy punches and elbows, and Saimpon was looking to counter with kicks and knees on the outside. Saimpon was dealing with it well for the first round, but in round 2, Dincer's pace started to get to him. He landed a couple big elbow flurries that opened a big cut near Saipon's eye, and Dincer went on to win a hard-fought decision after a close third round. After beating Chujaroen, Tapaokaew is probably seen as the favorite to win the tournament. He just beat Hercules in his last fight before the tournament started, and Jadvicha, while he's still a formidable fighter, is way past his best at this point, and he hasn't been beating top competition for quite a while. If I had to pick a likely winner at this point, though, I would probably go with Chujaroen. I'm sure him and Tapaokaew will meet again in the playoffs, and I could see a fight between them going either way, but if they end up meeting again in the finals, the fight will be over 5 rounds, and I have trouble seeing Tapaokaew keeping up that pace for that long, and he needs to set that kind of pace in order to take the fight into places where he can enforce his offense and he's best suited. If his pace slows even a little bit, I think Chujaroen kind of eats him up on the outside with kicks. RWS's next event on June 29th is the start of their 140-pound tournament. They have a good crop of guys for that one. They have most of the top ties in that division I would want to see, aside from maybe Rungkao or Samprabai. They have Nunglanglek Jitwangnan, Dam Paranchai, Kunhanlek, Pet Tongchai, and Kapitan Pet Indi. Kapitan and Kunhanlek are fighting on that event, and that's what I'm really looking forward to. That should be a fun one. They're both quite heavy-handed strikers. Kapitan is a Muay mat who's fought a lot in kickboxing, has very good hands and solid boxing. Kunhanlek is a well-rounded striker with decent power, and he's decent in the clinch too. You might be able to give Kapitan some trouble on the inside with its clinch game. I'll quickly run over some of the better fights in traditional Muay Thai last week as well. Songkham Sorsomai knocked out Popet Kilkarat with an abo in the third round. Songkham's a 29-year-old veteran who returned to Muay Thai last year after taking nearly a decade off. He went on a 3-fight losing streak when he first came back, but now he's won his last 3 with 2 knockouts in a row. He's a strong clincher, and he tore Popet apart in the clinch in this fight. The finish was really neat. Popet was reaching out to try and control his head, and Songkham was framing his jaw away over top of his extended arm, and he laid his shin across Popet's hips in like a little knee barrier to prevent him from throwing knees in the clinch. Popet tried to push forward and go through it, and Songkham suddenly dropped the knee barrier and smacked him with a huge elbow that finished him off. Jigsaw Sit Thailand had a fun clinch battle with Singpet Bor Rungrat. Jigsaw is a top 10 fighter at 108 pounds, and he's been slowly moving up to 112 over the past year. Both guys were really active in the clinch here with a lot of rapid back and forth transitions. Singpet had a lot of success in the third round, landing some nice pushing knees. He would turn Jigsaw in the clinch to get a little bit of space, and then bring his knee directly up and push it outwards into the body, allowing him to throw decently hard knees in pretty tight quarters. Jigsaw threatened a few foot sweeps and throws, and later on in the fight, he started landing really well off the clinch entries. He would physically shove Singpet away when he came in to enter the clinch and land hard punches and combinations. And on the inside, he started collapsing tight past Singpet's frames and getting in on underhooks and using those to control him against the ropes while he landed knees. Jigsaw's ability to punish Singpet's entries to the clinch eventually swung the fight in his favor, and he ended up winning a fun competitive decision. Apiwat Sorsomnuek and Pet Wanchai War Sanprapai also had a fun clinch battle. Apiwat is a 31-year-old hard-nosed bastard who's still going strong. From what I've seen of Petwanchai, he seems to be mostly a mid-range kicker, works a lot with his lead leg body kick. Apiwat came forward relentlessly here, and he would reach out and extend his arms to tie up Petwanchai's hands. And when Petwanchai went to his body kick, Apiwat would just take it on the arms and then use that as an opportunity to step into the clinch. And he was able to overwhelm Petwanchai on the inside and outscore him with knees and elbows. Finally, there was another fun fight between Wutong and Chujaroen, both top 15 fighters at 130 pounds. That fight took place mostly at trapping range, with them extending their hands to meet each other's hands and jostling for position and hand fighting and all that. Wutong showed some really nice defensive hand fighting. He was fighting off the back foot for most of the fight, and Chujaroen was trying to move forward and score with knees and elbows. And Wutong would meet his advance with his extended hands and use the hand fighting to gather information on the distance. So he would constantly be reaching out, poking and prodding and tying up Chujaroen's hands, and that allowed him to sense how far away they are. And when Chujaroen would step in with an elbow or knee, Wutong could slide back and give just enough ground to make it fall short and counter. And later on in the fight, Wutong started turning that hand fighting into hand trap elbows. He would reach out to meet both hands and then suddenly push one down, shift forward into southpaw, and fold an elbow over the top. If you want to read about those fights and a few others in a bit more detail, I do a weekly write-up of all the relevant Muay Thai fights on my Substack, and it includes videos of all the fights. You can find that article free at mixingmartialarts.com, and if you check back tomorrow, you'll also find my podcast for premium subscribers on this weekend's Bellator card that was stacked with interesting prospects. Only $5 per month gets you access to exclusive podcast episodes and in-depth breakdowns.